My parents sold my 9-year-old daughter's antique cello behind my back for $99,000. They used the money to build a swimming pool for my sister's kids because they said my daughter did not need such an expensive hobby. When my grandmother found out, she did not cry. She smiled and asked if they had kept the receipt. My parents' faces went pale when they realized that $99,000 was just a fraction of what they actually owed. My name is Simone, and I am 34 years old. I work as a forensic accountant here in Atlanta, which means I find money that people try to hide. But I never thought I would have to use those skills to hunt down my own parents. Before I tell you how I seized their house and left them with nothing, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon when my world collapsed. I had finished my audit in Chicago a day early and caught the first flight back to Atlanta, wanting to surprise my daughter Maya. Maya is 9, and she is the quietest soul you will ever meet. She speaks through her music. Since my grandmother gifted her that cello 3 years ago, she has barely put it down. It was her voice. As I pulled my car into the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front door was wide open, not just unlocked, but standing ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dropped my suitcase and ran toward the house. I expected to see broken glass or a ransacked living room. I expected to see a stranger. But the house was terrifyingly silent. I screamed Maya's name, but there was no answer. I ran to the living room where we had set up her practice corner. That was where I found her. Maya was curled into a tight ball on the hardwood floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She was rocking back and forth, her eyes wide and staring at nothing. She was not crying out loud, which was almost worse. She was completely silent, tears just streaming down her face, soaking her shirt. I fell to my knees beside her, grabbing her shoulders to check for injuries. Maya, where is it? I looked up at the empty space in the corner. The velvet-lined stand was empty. The hard case was gone. The music sheet was still on the stand, fluttering in the draft from the open door. My first thought was a robbery, but then I saw it. Near the entryway, the expensive cake of rosin she used for her bow was sitting in the trash can. A thief would not stop to throw away trash. A thief would not lock the bottom lock but leave the deadbolt open. Someone had walked in here with a key. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Maya finally looked at me and whispered one word. Grandpa. Rage, unlike anything I have ever felt, flooded my veins. I did not call the police yet. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, knowing exactly where I needed to go. I pulled my phone from my pocket with trembling hands and opened the home security app. I needed to see their faces. I needed to see them walking out the door with the only thing my daughter loved. But the screen remained black. A spinning wheel mocked me from the center of the display before the words "connection failed" flashed in red. My heart sank. They had not just taken the cello, they had unplugged the router. A common burglar would smash a camera or cut a wire. They would not know that the main hub was hidden behind a false panel in the hallway closet. Only family knew that. Only the people I invited into my sanctuary for Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties knew how to blind my digital eyes. This was premeditated. This was calculated. I dialed my mother, Patty, first. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice chirped in my ear. You have reached the residence of Desmond and Patty Jenkins. We are too blessed to be stressed right now, so leave a message. The cheerful hypocrisy of her tone made me want to scream. I hung up and dialed my father. Ring after ring echoed in the empty house. He was not declining the call. He was watching it ring. He was looking at my name on the screen and letting it fade into silence. They knew I was home. They knew I was standing in the empty space where the Guarneri used to sit. I needed air. The silence in the house was suffocating. I stepped out onto the front porch, scanning the driveway for tire tracks or scratches on the pavement. Anything that would give me a timeline. My eyes fell on the large recycling bin near the curb. The lid was slightly ajar, Sitting right on top of a pile of old mail and soda cans was a small, familiar box. I walked over and picked it up. It was Maya's rosin. It was a specialized cake of dark amber resin from France infused with gold dust to help the bow grip the antique strings. It cost $80. Eco. To a musician, it is essential. To my parents, it was just a sticky piece of junk. They had tossed it in the trash like a fast food wrapper. This single object told me everything. If they had sold it to a reputable dealer or a music shop, the buyer would have demanded the rosin and the spare strings. But my parents had sold it to someone who did not care about the music. They sold it for the wood. They sold it for quick cash. I squeezed the box until the resin cracked in my palm. The disrespect was not just financial, it was personal. They had stripped my daughter of her voice and thrown the accessories in the garbage. I looked back inside the house. Maya was still sitting there staring at the wall. She looked small and broken. The forensic accountant in me took over. The part of me that tracks embezzlement and fraud for a living pushed the grief aside. I knew where they were. My sister Chantel was incapable of doing anything without an audience. I pulled up Instagram. There it was. A story posted 15 minutes ago. A video of an excavator tearing up the lawn at my parents' estate in Buckhead. The caption read, "New pool coming soon." My niece and nephew were running around in the background, screaming with joy. I did not leave a note. I did not call again. I got into my car and threw the rosin on the passenger seat. The drive to Buckhead usually took 30 minutes. I made it in 15. As I crossed the city limits into Buckhead, the scenery shifted dramatically. The modest practical bungalows of my neighborhood were replaced by towering iron gates and driveways long enough to land a small plane on. This was the zip code my parents had spent their entire lives chasing. It was a place where reputation was currency and appearance was everything. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel of my sedan. I was not just driving to their house, I was driving into the heart of the lie they had built their lives around. The Jenkins estate loomed ahead like a monument to insecurity. It was a sprawling Georgian mansion with 4 white columns in the front that served no structural purpose other than to scream, "Look at us." The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. Not a blade of grass was out of place. In the center of the circular driveway stood a 3-tier fountain featuring stone cherubs pouring water into a basin. My mother told everyone it was imported Italian marble. I knew for a fact she bought it at a garden supply outlet 3 towns over during a clearance sale. That was the essence of Desmond and Patty. Everything was a performance. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw the driveway was already packed. There were at least 20 cars squeezed in, a parade of leased Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs shining under the afternoon sun. My sensible 4-year-old Toyota looked like a dirty smudge on a pristine painting as I wedged it between a Range Rover and a Jaguar. I turned off the ignition, but I did not get out immediately. I sat there gripping the door handle, staring at the house. To the outside world, this looked like the home of a successful power couple. But I was a forensic accountant. I saw the world in numbers and liabilities. I looked at that house, and I did not see success. I saw a second mortgage with an adjustable rate that was about to skyrocket. I saw property taxes that had not been paid in 2 quarters. I saw a facade held together by debt and delusion. And now I knew exactly how they planned to make the next payment. They had cannibalized my daughter's future to keep their lights on. I stepped out of the car and the air hit me. It smelled of expensive hickory wood smoke and grilled meat. The sound of laughter drifted over the tall privacy fence, mixed with the heavy bass line of a funk classic blasting from outdoor speakers. It was a celebration. They were eating, drinking, and dancing. The absolute audacity of it made me nauseous. They had stolen an antique instrument worth more than their souls, and they were using the proceeds to throw a barbecue. I walked toward the side gate that led to the backyard. The latch was cold under my hand. I could hear my brother-in-law Brad, loud voice booming over the music, telling a joke that was probably offensive. I could hear the splash of water. I took a deep breath. I was about to ruin their party. I was about to shatter the perfect image they had curated for their friends. And God help me, I was looking forward to it. I pushed the gate open and stepped into the lion's den. The backyard was a chaotic symphony of destruction and celebration. To my left, a massive yellow excavator was clawing at the earth, tearing up the sod my father had spent thousands maintaining just a year ago. The roar of the diesel engine competed with the DJ booth that was blasting upbeat funk music. But the centerpiece of this madness was my brother-in-law, Brad. He was standing behind a massive stainless steel grill, wearing a novelty apron that said King of the Grill. He was flipping ribs with a beer in one hand and a smug expression on his face that I wanted to slap off. When he saw me storming across the patio, he did not look concerned. He looked amused. He pointed a pair of grease-stained tongs at me like a weapon. "Whoa there, Simone. Take it down a notch. You are vibrating. Grab a plate and get some ribs before they are gone." His voice had that patronizing edge that always made my skin crawl. That specific tone of a mediocre man who feels entitled to tell a successful woman how to behave. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path to my father. "Seriously, Simone, fix your face. You are bringing down the vibe. It is a party, not a funeral." I slapped the tongs away from my face. The metal clattered onto the stone patio, causing the guests nearby to go silent. I did not even look at Brad. I looked past him to where my father was holding court. Desmond Jenkins was sitting under the shade of the pergola, nursing a glass of dark liquor. He looked like a man without a care in the world. He was wearing a white linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. When I cast my shadow over him, he looked up and smiled. It was the smile of a man who believes he has won the lottery. "Where is it, Dad?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I did not need to specify what it was. He took a slow sip of his drink and gestured vaguely toward the hole in the ground where the machine was digging. "If you are talking about that dusty old fiddle you left cluttering up my house, do not worry. I took care of it. I liquidated the asset." "You know, Simone, in this economy you have to be liquid." He said the word liquidated like he was a Wall Street broker instead of a man who had not held a steady job since the 90s. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You sold it. You sold Maya's cello." He shrugged, dusting an imaginary speck of lint from his lapel. "Sold is such a harsh word. I converted a useless object into an experience for the family." "Look at that hole, Simone. That is going to be a saltwater oasis. Your niece and nephew need to learn to swim, and you know the country club dues are getting ridiculous. I did us all a favor, really. It is $99,000 toward the family legacy. Now sit down and have a drink. You look terrible." I did not sit down. I kicked the empty teak chair next to me, and it clattered loudly against the stone patio. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the funk music and finally silence the conversations nearby. My mother, Patty, appeared from the sliding glass doors holding a tray of deviled eggs. She was wearing a floral maxi dress and oversized sunglasses. When she saw my face, she did not look guilty. She looked annoyed that I was interrupting her hosting duties. Patty set the tray down on the table with a heavy sigh. "Lower your voice, Simone. The neighbors will hear you acting like a banshee. We are celebrating today. Do not ruin this for your sister." She walked over to Desmond and placed a hand on his shoulder, presenting a united front against me. I pointed a shaking finger at the hole in the ground. "You stole from your granddaughter. You entered my home without permission and took the only thing that matters to her. That cello was a gift from Grandma Hattie. It is an antique Guarneri. Do you have any idea what you have done?" Patty waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, please. It was a box of dry wood, Simone. It was rotting in that corner. It smelled like old varnish and took up space. We did you a favor by getting rid of that clutter. Besides, we needed the money for something that actually matters. Family health." She gestured toward the excavator with pride. "Chantel's boys are hyperactive. You know how hard it is for her to manage them. The doctor suggested hydrotherapy. This is not just a pool, Simone. It is a wellness center for your nephews. We needed $99,000 for the contractor deposit and the saltwater filtration system. We did not have that kind of cash lying around, so we made an executive decision. I felt like the ground was tilting under my feet. You sold a piece of history for a pool deposit. You traded Maya's future so Chantel's kids can splash around in salt water. Patty stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Watch your tone. Maya is 9. She does not need a professional instrument. A plastic fiddle from the toy store sounds exactly the same. You are just being selfish as usual. You have your fancy job and your quiet house while your sister is struggling to raise 2 boys. We redistributed the assets to where they were needed most. That is what families do. We help each other. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and devoid of empathy. The cello was just firewood, Simone. At least now it is paying for something useful. You should be thanking us for handling the sale so quickly. We got cash in hand same day. Now stop making a scene and go say hello to your sister. She is over by the bar, and she wants to thank you for your involuntary contribution. The sheer entitlement in her voice left me breathless. To her, robbery was not a crime. It was just asset redistribution for the benefit of her favorite child. I looked at the muddy hole in the ground and realized there was no reasoning with these people. They had not just crossed a line, they had erased it completely. Just as my mother finished her lecture on family assets, my sister Chantel sauntered over to us. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne in one hand and her latest iPhone in the other. She looked picture-perfect in a white jumpsuit that was completely impractical for a barbecue but perfect for social media. She did not even look at me at first. She was too busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, adjusting a stray curl of her expensive weave. "What is with all the negative energy over here?" she asked without looking up. "I am trying to live stream the groundbreaking for my followers, and all I can hear is Simone shouting. It is really messing with the audio quality. Can you keep it down?" I stared at her in disbelief. My sister was the reason my parents were drowning in debt. She was 31 years old but still acted like a teenager who believed the world revolved around her. "Chantel," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Do you know where the money for this pool came from? Do you know they stole Maya's cello to pay for it?" Chantel finally looked at me, rolling her eyes. "Oh my God, Simone, get over it. Mom told me about the sale. Honestly, you should be happy. That old thing was gathering dust. Now it is going to help my boys. Little Marcus has so much energy, and the doctor said swimming is the best way to channel it. Do you want your nephews to suffer just so Maya can scratch away on some strings? It is called priorities." She took a sip of her champagne, leaving a perfect rim of pink lipstick on the glass. "Besides, you make plenty of money. If Maya really needs to play music, buy her a keyboard or a flute. Something modern. Why are you always so dramatic about everything? You are ruining the vibe of the party. Look around, Simone. Everyone is having a good time except you." I felt a hand on my arm. It was my father, Desmond. His grip was not gentle. He squeezed my bicep hard enough to bruise, digging his fingers into my skin. "Listen to your sister, Simone. You are upsetting the guests. We invited you here out of courtesy, but if you are going to stand here and disrespect my decisions in my own house, you can leave." I pulled my arm away from him. "Disrespect. You are the one who committed grand larceny. You are the one who stole from a child." Desmond laughed, a cold, hard sound. "It is not stealing when it is family property. And since you seem to have forgotten who is the head of this family, I think it is time for you to go. Do not come back until you can apologize to your mother and sister for this scene. Go home, Simone. Go back to your empty house and your spreadsheets. Let us enjoy our success." He turned his back on me, dismissing me like I was a solicitor at the door. Patty and Chantel exchanged a look of triumph. They had won. They had the money, they had the pool, and they had successfully painted me as the villain. I looked at them one last time, searing the image into my memory. Chantel sipping her champagne, Patty adjusting her sunglasses, Desmond shaking hands with a neighbor near the excavator. I turned and walked away. I did not look back as I marched through the gate and past the fountain. I got into my car and slammed the door, shutting out the sound of the funk music and their laughter. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. They thought this was over. They thought they had just taught me a lesson about hierarchy. As I drove away from the mansion, leaving the party in my rearview mirror, I made a promise to myself. I would not just get the cello back. I would take everything they had. The pool, the house, the reputation. If they wanted to talk about assets and liabilities, I was about to audit their entire lives. The fluorescent lights of the Atlanta Police Precinct hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I sat across from Officer Miller, a man who looked like he was counting the minutes until his shift ended. I had spent the last 20 minutes laying out the facts of the case with the precision of a forensic accountant. I used words like grand larceny burglary and unauthorized entry. I presented the empty insurance valuation form I kept in my glove box, which proved the cello was worth far more than the felony threshold. I expected him to reach for his radio. I expected him to dispatch a unit to Buckhead to arrest the people who robbed my daughter. Instead, Officer Miller leaned back in his chair and sighed. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Ms. Jenkins, I am going to stop you right there. We have already received a call about this situation. Your father contacted the precinct an hour ago. He said you might be coming in to file a false report regarding a family transaction." My blood ran cold. Desmond had beaten me here. He had anticipated my move and poisoned the well before I even arrived. "That is a lie," I said, my voice rising. "He stole from my house. He admitted it to my face less than an hour ago." Miller slid a piece of paper across the metal desk. It was a printout of a text message conversation. My eyes widened as I scanned the familiar gray and blue bubbles. The contact name at the top was simply Dad. The message from my number read, "Honestly, just get rid of it, Dad. It is just taking up space, and I do not care about that old wood anymore. Keep the money for the pool. I know you guys need it." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I never wrote that. I never sent that message. I looked closer and saw the clumsy syntax. They had taken real messages I sent years ago about clearing out old furniture from their attic and spliced them together with new fabrication. It was a digital collage of lies. "This is a forgery," I told the officer, slamming my hand on the desk. "You can check my phone right now. This conversation does not exist. They edited this." Miller shook his head, refusing to look at my phone. "Ms. Jenkins, we are not a digital forensics lab. We are a precinct. Right now I have a document that suggests this was a consensual agreement between family members. You gave him permission, and now you have seller's remorse. That does not make it a crime." "But it is fake," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "It does not matter what you say versus what he says," the officer interrupted. "Without concrete proof of a break-in, and with this evidence of an agreement, this falls outside our jurisdiction. This is a dispute over property ownership and verbal contracts. It is a civil matter." Those two words hit me harder than a physical blow. Civil matter. It was the catchphrase of a system that refused to protect victims of domestic financial abuse. My parents had not just stolen the cello, they had weaponized the legal system against me. They knew the police would not want to get involved in a wealthy Buckhead family dispute on a Sunday evening. I stood up, grabbing my purse. I realized then that my parents were not just greedy, they were calculated. They had planned this heist down to the alibi. As I walked out of the station into the humid Atlanta night, I knew that playing by the rules was not going to work. The law had just washed its hands of me. If I wanted justice for Maya, I would have to stop acting like a daughter and start acting like the cold-hearted auditor they claimed I was. The silence in my house was heavier than the humid air outside. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the sound of a dream dying. I walked into the kitchen where the only light came from the stove hood. Maya was sitting at the table. In front of her was a bowl of homemade macaroni and cheese with the extra crispy edges she usually fought me for. Tonight the bowl was full, and the cheese had gone cold and rubbery. Maya was not eating. She was staring at her left hand, which rested on the edge of the table. Her fingers were moving. They were curling and vibrating against the wood, executing a perfect vibrato on an invisible string. She was playing a concerto in her mind on an instrument that was currently in the hands of a thief. Watching her airplay broke something inside me that I did not know was still intact. I pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. "Baby, you have to eat something," I whispered. Maya did not look up. Her fingers stopped moving. Grandpa said I did not need it. She said her voice so flat it scared me. He said I was just making noise and that the pool would make everyone happy. He said I was being selfish for keeping something so expensive just to make noise. The rage flared up again, hot and sharp. Desmond had not just taken the wood and strings, he had taken her confidence. He had looked a 9-year-old prodigy in the eye and told her that her art was worth less than a hole in the ground. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The screen lit up with a number I recognized immediately. The Atlanta Junior Conservatory. My stomach dropped. I cleared my throat and swiped answer, trying to sound like a professional mother and not a woman on the edge of a breakdown. "Hello, this is Simone. Good evening, Ms. Jenkins. It is Director Gable." The woman's voice was crisp and efficient. "We are just calling to confirm Maya's slot for the regional showcase this Saturday. We have judges flying in from Juilliard specifically to hear the piece she has been working on. We need to know if she requires a piano accompanist or if she will be performing solo. Saturday, 4 days." I felt the walls closing in. The showcase was the gateway to the scholarship program. It was everything Maya had worked for. "Yes." I managed to say, my voice steady despite the panic. "She will be there. She is ready." "Wonderful. We look forward to hearing that Guarneri. We rarely get to hear an instrument of that caliber. Have a good night." The line went dead. I looked at Maya. She had heard every word. She looked at me with tears brimming in her large dark eyes. "I cannot play on a school rental, Mom," she whispered. "The action is too high. The sound is dead. I cannot play for them on a plywood box. I will fail." I reached out and took her hands in mine. They were cold. I squeezed them tight, forcing her to look at me. I needed her to see the fire in my eyes, so she could borrow some of its warmth. "Listen to me, Maya. I am not asking you to play on a rental. You are going to play on your cello." She shook her head, a tear finally escaping. "But Grandpa sold it. It is gone. It is not gone." I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "It is just misplaced. And I am going to find it. I do not care if I have to tear that pool out of the ground with my bare hands. I do not care who I have to hurt or whose life I have to ruin. You will walk onto that stage on Saturday holding your grandmother's gift." I stood up and grabbed my laptop bag. The grief was gone. In its place was the cold, hard logic of a forensic accountant. I was done crying. It was time to follow the money. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning, shattering the fragile concentration I had managed to build. I was sitting at my kitchen island, surrounded by bank statements and printed emails, trying to trace the trail of deception my parents had left behind. When I opened the door, I found Brad standing on my porch. My brother-in-law was wearing his signature real estate agent uniform, khaki pants that were too tight, and a polo shirt with the logo of a brokerage firm he had been fired from 6 months ago. He did not wait for an invitation. He breezed past me into the hallway, bringing the smell of cheap cologne and condescension with him. "Hey, Simone, we need to have a little powwow," he said, using a phrase that made my skin crawl. He walked straight to my kitchen and leaned against the counter right on top of my organized stack of documents. He crossed his arms and gave me a look that was supposed to be sympathetic, but just looked smug. I stood by the door, my hands still on the knob. "Get out, Brad. I am not in the mood for your life coaching today." Now, let us not be hostile," he chided, holding up a hand. "I am here as a neutral third party. I am here to facilitate a resolution before you do something you will regret. Look, Simone, I know you are upset about the violin or whatever, but you need to understand the legal ramifications of what you are threatening. I have been in real estate for 10 years. I know a thing or two about property law. I stared at him. He sold mid-range condos. I worked with federal prosecutors to uncover international fraud rings. The fact that he thought he could lecture me on the law was almost laughable. Brad continued, his voice taking on a lecture tone. See, there is a concept called constructive abandonment. You left the instrument at their house for extended periods. In the eyes of the law, that implies transfer of ownership. By leaving it there, you essentially gifted it to the estate. If you try to sue Desmond and Patty, you are going to get laughed out of court. It is a frivolous lawsuit, Simone, and honestly, it makes you look unstable. He paused for effect, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of his made-up legal terminology. When I did not speak, he leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Plus, you need to think about the optics. Suing your own parents. Dragging Chantel's name through the mud. The judges in this town play golf with Desmond. Do you really want to go to war with the establishment over a used instrument? It is professional suicide. I looked at his confident smirk and realized something terrifying. He actually believed what he was saying. He was so wrapped up in the delusion of our family's importance that he thought they were untouchable. He thought a few buzzwords and a mention of my father's golf buddies would scare me into submission. Brad tapped his finger on the granite counter. Here's the deal. You drop this whole police report nonsense. You apologize to your mother for the scene you caused. In exchange, we will let you come to the pool parties once it is built. We might even let Maya swim. It is a generous offer, Simone. You should take it. I walked over to the counter and picked up the file he was leaning on. I looked him dead in the eye. Brad, you have 3 seconds to get out of my house before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. And just so you know, constructive abandonment applies to tenants, not stolen property. Brad blinked, his smile faltering for a second. He straightened up, brushing his shirt. Fine. Be that way. Be the bitter sister. But do not say I did not warn you. When you lose everything, do not come crying to us. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I watched him go through the window. He marched to his car, pulling out his phone immediately. He looked nervous. His hands were shaking as he dialed. That was when I knew. He was not here to protect my parents. He was here to protect himself. He was afraid of what I would find if I kept digging. And he was right to be afraid. The sound of Brad's car peeling out of my driveway faded into the distance, but the anger he left behind settled in my chest like a cold stone. He had made a fatal error. He had threatened a forensic accountant with legal jargon he did not understand. He assumed I was just a grieving mother who would cry and give up. He forgot that my entire career was built on dismantling the lies of people much smarter and richer than him. I walked into my home office and locked the door. This was no longer a family dispute. This was an investigation. I sat down at my dual monitor setup and woke up my workstation. The screens glowed with a familiar blue light. This was my domain. Out there in the real world, I was the overlooked middle child. But in here, among the spreadsheets and ledgers, I was a predator. I opened a secure browser window. My parents were financially illiterate. 5 years ago, when they were on the brink of bankruptcy due to Desmond's failed investment in an ostrich farm, they had come to me begging for help. I had spent months restructuring their debt, refinancing their mortgage, and setting up a consolidated family trust to manage their expenses. I had saved them from ruin. And because they were lazy and entitled, they had never bothered to change the administrative passwords I created for them. I typed in the URL for the master banking portal. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. Username, Admin Jenkins. Password, Absolute Power. I hit enter. For a second, the loading circle spun, and I held my breath, wondering if they had finally developed enough common sense to lock me out. But then the dashboard populated. Green numbers and red graphs filled the screen. I was in. I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. They thought they could cut me out of the family, but they had left the keys to the vault in my pocket. I navigated to the transaction history for the joint checking account. This was the main artery of their financial life. If they had sold the cello, the money would have hit here first. I filtered the search for deposits over $10,000 in the last 48 hours. There it was. A wire transfer from an LLC I did not recognize. $99,000. The description field was blank. My father had not even bothered to label it. To him, it was just free money falling from the sky. But forensic accounting is not just about seeing what came in, it is about seeing where it bleeds out. Money leaves a trail like blood in the water. I clicked on the transaction ID, expanding the view to see the immediate disbursements. My parents claimed the money was for a pool. They claimed it was for a contractor deposit. But the numbers on my screen told a very different story. I pulled up a fresh spreadsheet on my second monitor. I titled it, The Jenkins Audit. I began to map out the flow of funds. The $99,000 had not stayed in the account for more than an hour. It had been sliced up and scattered immediately. It was a feeding frenzy. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the merchant codes and routing numbers. The first chunk of money had gone somewhere I did not expect. And it definitely was not a pool company. It was a personal payoff. I highlighted the line item in yellow. The hunt was on. The first outgoing wire was for $20,000 exactly. It was timestamped just 40 minutes after the cello money hit the account. My father had barely let the ink dry on the sale before he started bleeding the funds. The recipient was listed as SP Global Ventures, which sounded legitimate enough to pass a casual glance. It sounded like a contractor or a pool supply company. But forensic accounting is the art of looking past the name and staring directly at the code. I highlighted the transaction and ran a query on the merchant category code associated with the receiving bank routing number. If this was a pool company, the code would be for construction services or home improvement. I waited a split second for the database to return the value. The screen flashed the code 7995. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Code 7995 does not stand for concrete or saltwater filters. It stands for betting casino and lottery wagers. This was not a construction deposit. It was a gambling debt. I dug deeper into the transfer details. My parents were sloppy. In the memo line of the wire transfer, they had left a reference number, B-Miller-Sports-88. I did not need a search warrant to know who that was. Brad Miller, my brother-in-law. The man who had stood in my kitchen less than an hour ago preaching to me about family values and fiscal responsibility. The man who claimed my lawsuit would ruin the family reputation was secretly funneling my daughter's inheritance into an offshore sportsbook. The narrative began to shift in my head. The pool was a cover story. Sure, they might dig a hole in the ground to make it look real, but the urgency to sell the cello came from somewhere else. Brad must have been in deep. You do not wire $20,000 to a gambling site on a Tuesday unless you are chasing a massive loss or paying off a bookie who is threatening to break your legs. I sat back in my chair staring at the glowing monitor. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They looked at my daughter practicing her scales and saw a waste of time. But they looked at Brad, a mediocre real estate agent with a gambling addiction, and saw a priority. They stripped a child of her gift to fund a grown man's vice. I took a screenshot of the transaction. Then I traced the IP address of the device used to authorize the transfer. It matched my father's iPad. Desmond had knowingly sent this money. He was enabling Brad. Was he protecting Chantel from knowing the truth about her husband? Or was he just that desperate to keep up the appearance of a perfect happy family? It did not matter. I had them. This $20,000 transfer was the smoking gun that proved the money was not used for the benefit of the family estate as they claimed. It was misappropriation of funds. And more importantly, it gave me leverage over Brad. He was the weak link in their alliance. If Chantel knew her husband had gambled away a fifth of the cello money before the pool was even dug, she would burn him alive. I saved the file as Exhibit A. Then I moved to the next line item on the spreadsheet. There was still $79,000 left to account for, and if the first transaction was this dirty, I could only imagine where the rest had gone. I turned my attention to the second largest withdrawal on the list. This one was for $10,000 exactly. It had been processed just 2 hours after Brad sent his gambling money. The recipient was listed under a vague acronym, BSL Society. My mother had stood in my face and swore that every penny from the sale was going toward the pool construction. She had cried crocodile tears about my nephew Marcus needing hydrotherapy for his hyperactivity. She had weaponized a child's health to justify theft. I needed to know if BSL Society was a medical equipment supplier or a specialized contractor. I ran the tax identification number through the state business registry. The results populated instantly. The BSL Society was not a medical group. It stood for the Buckhead Social League. My stomach turned. This was the most exclusive and pretentious women's club in Atlanta. It was a place where wealthy housewives gathered to drink overpriced tea and judge each other's handbags. Membership was by invitation only, and the initiation fee was notoriously high. My sister Chantel had been trying to get into this club for 3 years. She had been rejected twice because she did not meet the financial requirements. But suddenly on a Tuesday afternoon she had $10,000 cash to pay the entry fee. I felt a surge of nausea. They had not sold the cello for Marcus. They had sold it so Chantel could buy friends. I needed visual confirmation. I knew my sister. If she had finally bought her way into the inner circle, she would not be able to keep it quiet. I refreshed her Instagram page, and there it was, a photo posted just 10 minutes ago. Chantel was sitting at a white linen-covered table, holding a gold-embossed membership card up to her cheek. She was beaming. The location tag read, Buckhead Social League Members Lounge. The caption made my blood boil. It read, "So proud to finally join this amazing group of boss women. Sometimes you have to invest in yourself to level up. Big things coming for the Jenkins family. Hashtag blessed, hashtag new levels, hashtag member only." I stared at the screen, my hand gripping the mouse so hard my knuckles turned white. There was no mention of Marcus, no mention of the pool or therapy. The narrative about the poor suffering nephew was just a convenient lie to make me feel guilty. They had used my daughter's legacy to fund Brad's gambling and Chantel's social climbing. The pool was just a cover story, a shallow hole in the ground to hide where the money really went. I downloaded the photo and saved it to the folder next to the gambling records. I had proof of embezzlement. I had proof of fraud. But I was not done yet. There was still one piece of the puzzle missing: the buyer. I knew where the money went, but I still needed to know who had the cello. I needed to find Vargo. I closed the spreadsheet and opened a new search window. It was time to hunt down the man who facilitated this crime. I had tracked the money leaving the account, but now I needed to look at the source. The $99,000 had arrived via a wire transfer from an entity listed as V Imports Limited. It sounded innocuous. It sounded like a legitimate business that imported rugs or furniture. But in my line of work, vague names usually hide dirty secrets. I copied the tax identification number from the wire detail and ran it through a LexisNexis background check. The screen populated with a dossier that made my blood run cold. The owner of V Imports was a man named Elias Vargo. In the world of high-end asset recovery, Vargo was a legend for all the wrong reasons. He was not an antique dealer. He was a fence. He was the man you went to when you had stolen jewelry or heirlooms that you needed to turn into cash without questions asked. He operated in the gray areas of the law, buying low from desperate people and selling high to private collectors who did not care about provenance. My parents had not sold the cello to a musician. They had sold it to a vulture. This changed everything. If a legitimate dealer had bought it, I could have filed an injunction to stop the resale. But Vargo moved inventory fast. By now that cello could be in a shipping container headed to Dubai or Macau. I looked up the registered business address for V Imports. It was a warehouse in an industrial park near the airport. I pulled up the most recent satellite imagery and checked the business filings. As I suspected, Vargo was one step ahead. The filing status showed that V Imports Limited had been dissolved yesterday morning. Just hours after he picked up the cello, Vargo had burned the paper trail. He had closed the business, disconnected the phone lines, and likely vacated the warehouse. He was a ghost. My parents had handed a multi-million-dollar instrument to a professional criminal for pennies on the dollar, and now that criminal had vanished. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest, but I forced it down. Vargo might be good at hiding, but nobody disappears completely. Everyone leaves a digital footprint, especially when they are moving heavy inventory. I needed to get to that warehouse. I needed to see if he had left anything behind. A shipping label, a receipt, anything that could tell me where he was going. I grabbed my keys and the small pistol I kept in a lockbox for emergencies. This was no longer just about recovering an instrument. I was about to walk into the underworld of black market trafficking, and I was not going in unprotected. I drove back to the house in Buckhead with a sense of grim determination. The sun had set and the party was over. The street was quiet again, but the damage was visible even in the twilight. The massive yellow excavator sat silent in the backyard, like a sleeping dinosaur guarding the muddy crater it had created. I did not park in the driveway this time. I left my car running at the curb, ready to chase down whatever lead I could get. I walked up the stone path and pounded on the heavy oak door. I did not use the brass knocker. I used my fist. I hit the wood hard enough to hurt my knuckles. I knew they were inside, counting their money and congratulating themselves on a successful day of grifting. It took 2 minutes for the door to open. My mother stood there. She had changed out of her floral dress into a silk robe that I knew cost $600. She held a half-empty glass of red wine in one hand, and she looked at me with pure exhaustion. "Go home, Simone," she said, before I could speak. "The party is over. The ribs are gone. And quite frankly, I have had enough of your negative energy for one day." I jammed my foot in the doorframe before she could close it. "I know about V imports. I know about Elias Vargo." I stared into her eyes, searching for a flicker of shame. "I know he is a fence mom. I know he has a criminal record for trafficking stolen goods. You did not sell the cello to a collector. You sold it to a crook who dissolved his company this morning. I need his real number. I need to know where he took it." Patty took a sip of wine, her eyes narrowing. "You are being paranoid. Mr. Vargo was a very polite gentleman. He paid cash. He did not ask questions. That is the kind of business I like. Whatever he does with his own time is none of my concern. He has disappeared, Mom." I shouted, my voice cracking. "He is gone, and he has Maya's future with him. Please, if you have a cell phone number or an email or even a license plate number, give it to me. Help me fix this." Patty sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation of breath. She turned around and walked over to the hallway console table where a pile of junk mail was sitting. She shuffled through the papers for a moment before picking up a glossy flyer. She walked back to the door and shoved it into my chest. "You want to fix it? Here, this is how you fix it." I looked down at the paper. It was a coupon for a musical instrument chain store. On the front was a picture of a neon purple electric violin made of plastic. The text screamed, "Back to school sale. Buy one, get one free. Buy her one of those," Patty said, gesturing with her wine glass. "It has a volume knob so she does not have to annoy the neighbors. And look, it comes in colors. Maya loves purple. Stop chasing ghosts, Simone, and just be a mother. Get her a toy she can actually play with and stop obsessing over that old piece of wood." I stared at the flyer. The cello she sold was a masterpiece crafted in 1720. She was offering me a plastic toy worth $50. The gap in our values was so wide it was unbridgeable. Patty stepped back and kicked my foot out of the doorframe. "Good night, Simone. Do not come back until you are ready to apologize." The heavy door slammed shut in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a final metallic clack. I stood alone on the porch, holding the coupon for the plastic violin. I crushed the paper in my fist until my nails dug into my palm. I was done begging. I was done investigating. If they wanted a war over that cello, I was about to bring an army to their doorstep. And the general of that army was about to land at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It was Friday afternoon, just 24 hours before Maya was scheduled to stand on the stage for her audition. The air in my house was thick with a silent, hopeless tension. I had spent the last 2 days chasing shadows. The police were useless. Vargo was a ghost. My parents had blocked my number. I was staring at my laptop screen wondering how I was going to tell my daughter that her dreams were over when a yellow taxi pulled into the driveway. Grandma Hattie stepped out of the cab. She was 72 years old, but she moved with the regal posture of a queen. She was wearing a trench coat from Burberry and oversized sunglasses, and she looked every inch the matriarch she was. She had been in Paris for a month, visiting old friends and soaking up the culture. I had completely forgotten she was returning today. I rushed out to help the driver with her luggage, but Hattie waved me away. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was. She tilted her head toward the house and frowned. "Why is it so quiet, Simone? It is 4 in the afternoon. Maya should be practicing her scales. I could hear that child playing from the street before the taxi even stopped. Is she sick?" I felt a lump form in my throat. I did not know how to say it. I did not know how to look this woman in the eye and tell her that the family she raised had cannibalized her legacy. "Come inside, Grandma," I said quietly. "There is something you need to see." Hattie followed me into the house. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floors, a sound that usually signaled order and discipline. We walked past the empty living room corner where the cello stand used to be. Hattie paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to the vacant space, but she said nothing. She followed me down the hall to Maya's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. What we saw inside broke my heart all over again. Maya was sitting on the edge of her bed. Her back was straight, her posture perfect. Her left hand was raised in the air, fingers curling and vibrating against an invisible neck. Her right arm was moving back and forth in long sweeping strokes, holding an invisible bow. She was playing the cello, but there was no instrument. She was playing the Elgar Concerto in E minor entirely from muscle memory. Tears were streaming down her face, but she did not make a sound. She was lost in a world where the music still existed, where her grandfather had not stolen her voice. It was the most pathetic and beautiful thing I had ever seen. Hattie stood in the doorway, frozen. I watched her face. I expected to see shock. I expected to see grief. But Grandma Hattie did not grieve like normal people. As she watched her granddaughter playing a ghost instrument, the warmth vanished from her eyes. Her expression hardened into something cold and terrifying. It was the look of a general surveying a massacre. She stepped into the room. Maya stopped moving, immediately wiping her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered. "I am sorry. I tried to stop them." Hattie walked over and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. She did not coo or coddle. She looked at me. Her voice was low and dangerous, like the rumble of thunder before a storm. "Where is the Guarneri Simone?" I took a deep breath. Mom and Dad took it. They sold it to build a pool. Hattie did not scream. She did not gasp. She simply nodded once slowly. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Get your car keys, Simone. We are going to Buckhead, and God have mercy on their souls, because I certainly will not." Grandma Hattie closed the bedroom door softly, leaving Maya to her silent concerto. In the hallway, the air felt different. It was colder. Hattie did not scream. She did not throw her purse. She simply adjusted her leather gloves and looked at me with eyes that could cut glass. "Stop crying, Simone," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Tears are for victims. We are not victims today. We are the executioners." She pulled her phone from her trenchcoat pocket and dialed a number. I knew she was calling my father. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion, but it never came. When she spoke, her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Desmond, it is Mother. I am back. Be at your house in 30 minutes. Have Patty and Chantel there. Do not make me wait." She hung up before he could respond. She did not ask if they were busy. She did not ask if they were home. She issued a command and expected the universe to align with her will. She turned to me and pointed a gloved finger at the car keys in my hand. Drive. The ride to Buckhead was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Hattie sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. She did not speak. She did not turn on the radio. She was gathering her strength, focusing her rage into a single sharp point. I glanced at her and saw the matriarch who had built this family from nothing. Desmond had forgotten who he came from. He thought he was the king of his little castle, but he had forgotten that the queen can take any piece on the board. When we pulled up to the mansion, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the torn-up lawn. The excavator looked like a skeleton in the dim light. My parents' car was in the driveway next to Chantel's SUV. They were all there. They probably thought Hattie was coming to give them gifts from Paris. They probably thought she would be impressed by their new pool project. Hattie waited for me to open her door. She stepped out onto the driveway and looked at the house with a sneer of disgust. She smoothed her coat and began to walk toward the front door. Her heels clicked on the pavement like the ticking of a countdown clock. I followed a few steps behind her, feeling a strange sensation. For the first time since the cello was stolen, I was not afraid. I looked at the back of her head and knew that the storm had finally arrived. Desmond and Patty were about to learn that there are things in this world much scarier than a forensic accountant. They were about to face the woman who taught me everything I knew about survival. When we walked into the living room, the atmosphere was nauseatingly cheerful. My parents and Chantel were gathered around the coffee table, which was littered with brochures for pool liners and outdoor furniture. When they saw Grandma Hattie standing in the archway, they erupted into a chorus of performative excitement. Patty jumped up from the sofa, her silk robe flowing behind her like a cape. "Mother, you are back early. Look at you. Paris must have been wonderful. You look 10 years younger." She reached out to hug Hattie, but my grandmother took a subtle step back. It was a small movement, but it was as effective as a slap. Patty froze, her arms still extended in the air. She laughed nervously, dropping her hands to her sides. "Well, do not keep us in suspense. Did you bring us anything? I bet the fashion over there is to die for." Desmond stood up, swirling his drink. "Welcome home, Mother. You are just in time. We have some big news. We are finally upgrading the backyard. It is going to be a state-of-the-art wellness center for the boys." He gestured grandly toward the sliding glass doors where the mud pit lay in the darkness. "We are making big moves, keeping the Jenkins legacy alive and thriving." Chantel chimed in from the armchair. "Hey, Grandma. Sorry we are a mess. We have been celebrating all week. You should see the designs for the pool house. It is going to have a sauna." They were so loud, so confident. They were chatting away, assuming that Hattie was just there to validate their choices and hand out expensive souvenirs. They did not notice the way she was looking at them. They did not see that she had not taken off her sunglasses or her gloves. She stood in the center of the room like a statue carved out of judgment. I stood by the door, silent and watchful. I knew what was coming. I saw the trap snapping shut before they even knew they were standing in it. Hattie did not answer their questions. She did not comment on the pool. She did not smile. She walked over to the fireplace where a large oil painting of my grandfather hung. She looked at it for a long moment, then turned slowly to face her son. The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed in the background, a low drone that sounded like a warning siren. Desmond cleared his throat, his smile faltering slightly. "Mother, is everything all right? You seem tense. Let me get you a brandy." Hattie raised one gloved hand. Desmond stopped moving instantly. She lowered her sunglasses just enough so he could see her eyes. They were not the eyes of a mother looking at her son. They were the eyes of a creditor looking at a defaulter. "I have one question," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room with terrifying clarity. "Where is the Guarneri?" The silence that followed was heavy and instant. It was as if she had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Patty stopped smiling. Chantel looked up from her phone. Desmond's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. They looked at each other, exchanging panic with their eyes. They had rehearsed a lie for me. They had rehearsed a lie for the police, but they had not prepared a lie for Hattie. They knew that she knew. And in that moment, the power dynamic in the room shifted violently. The party was over. The trial had begun. Desmond let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching under a boot. He took a long sip of his brandy, trying to buy time. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit strategy, but there was none. He was trapped between his mother's judgment and my evidence. "Oh, that old thing," he said, finally waving his hand dismissively. "Mother, you worry too much. I had it moved to storage. With all this construction work going on in the backyard, I did not want the dust to damage the wood. It is safe and sound in a climate-controlled facility downtown. I am just protecting the family assets. That is what a good steward does." He smiled at Hattie, a wide, charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble for 50 years. But Hattie did not smile back. She did not even blink. She just stared at him, waiting for the lie to rot in the air between them. I did not let him finish his performance. I walked forward and tossed the heavy manila folder onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a sharp slap that made Chantel jump. The folder slid across the surface, knocking over a brochure for luxury pool tiles, before coming to a stop right in front of Desmond. "Stop lying, Dad," I said, my voice steady and cold. "There is no storage unit. There is no climate control." Desmond looked at the folder, then up at me. His face flushed with anger. "How dare you throw things in my house, Simone? You are being hysterical again." "Open it," I commanded. Desmond did not move, so I reached over and flipped the folder open. The first page was a blown-up copy of the wire transfer I had pulled from the bank logs. The number $99,000 was highlighted in neon yellow. Next to it was the sender's name, V Imports Limited. I pointed at the number. "Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. You received a wire transfer for $99,000 from Elias Vargo. You sold the Guarneri to a black market fence. You did not put it in storage. You cashed it out like a used car." The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed in the background, sounding deafening in the quiet. Desmond stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He looked at Hattie, terrified. Patty tried to intervene. She stood up, her silk robe rustling. "Now wait a minute, Mother. You have to understand. We were in a liquidity crunch. It was a business decision. We meant to tell you, but we did not want to worry you while you were enjoying Paris." "Business decision," I repeated. "You sold a $4 million instrument for $99,000. That is not business, Mom. That is stupidity. And you did it behind our backs." Desmond slammed his glass down on the table, splashing amber liquid onto the documents. "It was my house," he shouted, his voice cracking. "It was under my roof. That makes it my property. I have the right to do whatever I want with things in my house." He was not denying it anymore. He was justifying it. And that was his fatal mistake. He had just admitted to the theft in front of the only person in the world who could destroy him. I looked at Grandma Hattie. She was looking at the bank statement on the table. Her face was unreadable, but her hands were clenched into fists so tight that the leather of her gloves stretched taut. The trap was sprung. They had walked right into it. Desmond was still rambling about his rights as the head of the household when Hattie finally laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that cut through his bluster like a knife. She walked over to the coffee table and picked up the folder I had thrown there. She did not look at the bank transfer or the evidence of his gambling. She looked at her son with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You are a fool, Desmond. You always have been. You think you sold my cello. You think you sold a family heirloom that I simply gifted to Maya. You are wrong." She reached into the inside pocket of her Burberry coat and pulled out a sleek black leather document holder. She extracted a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper with a gold seal at the top. She placed it gently on the table right on top of the incriminating wire transfer record. "Read it," she commanded. Desmond squinted at the paper. I watched his eyes scan the header and saw the blood drain from his face until he looked like a walking corpse. His hands began to shake violently, rattling the paper against the glass table. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling so hard he could barely form the words. "What is the National Musical Heritage Preservation Fund?" Hattie straightened her spine, looming over him like a judge passing sentence. "That cello was never mine, Desmond. I do not own it. I never have. It belongs to the fund. It is a protected historical artifact on loan to me as a lifetime custodian. I was entrusted to keep it safe until it could be passed to the next verified prodigy. That prodigy was supposed to be Maya." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "When you sold that instrument, you did not just steal from your mother. You committed grand larceny against a federal nonprofit organization. You trafficked in stolen cultural property. That is not a family squabble, Desmond. That is a federal crime with a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Patty gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Her eyes darted between her husband and the document on the table. "But we did not know," she stammered. "We thought it was just old junk. You cannot send your own son to prison for a mistake, Mother. It was an accident." Hattie turned her gaze to Patty. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Patty, especially when you sold the item to a known fence in a back alley deal. You bypassed the legal channels because you knew what you were doing was wrong. You wanted quick cash and you did not care where it came from. Well, now you are going to care. Because the fund does not accept apologies, they accept restitution or they accept incarceration." I stood there stunned. The stakes had just skyrocketed. My parents were no longer looking at a civil lawsuit from their daughter or a lecture from their mother. They were staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. The pool, the reputation, the social climbing it was all about to be buried under the weight of a felony charge. And for the first time in his life, my father looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a window and realized too late that it was stained glass. Desmond looked at the document as if it were a death warrant. He tried to speak, but his throat was so dry that only a rasping sound came out. He looked at the number printed on the insurance certificate, and then he looked at his mother. He shook his head slowly, unable to process the magnitude of his mistake. "That is impossible," he whispered. "It is just wood and strings. No fiddle is worth that much. You are trying to scare us, Mother." Hattie did not blink. She reached out and tapped the paper with a gloved finger. "It is a Guarneri del Gesù crafted in 1720. There are fewer than 150 in existence, and this one is the most pristine of them all. The current insurance valuation is $4.5 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. 4.5 million. I watched my mother Patty grab the edge of the sofa to steady herself. Her knees had given out. She looked at the muddy hole in the backyard, which had cost them everything, and then she looked at Hattie. They had sold a $4 million asset for $99,000. They had traded a fortune for a swimming pool deposit. The sheer stupidity of the transaction was almost physically painful to witness. Hattie continued, her voice relentless. "But the money you lost is the least of your problems. Because you did not own it, you did not have the right to sell it. That makes this theft. But because of the value and the historical status of the item, it falls under the National Stolen Property Act. You transported stolen goods worth more than $5,000 across state lines or facilitated their sale to a fence who operates interstate. That is a federal crime, Desmond." She took a step closer to him, towering over her seated son. "And since I am the trustee and you took it from my care without my consent, you have also committed embezzlement of trust property. Do you know what the sentencing guidelines are for that level of fraud? You are looking at 20 years. Each." Chantel let out a high-pitched sob. She dropped her phone, which bounced on the expensive rug. "I cannot go to prison," she wailed. "I have kids. I have a brand to build. Grandma, you cannot let them take us away." Hattie looked at her granddaughter with cold indifference. You should have thought about your brand before you used the proceeds of a felony to buy a membership to a social club. You are all accomplices. You all ate from the fruit of the poisonous tree. The FBI does not care about your social media following Chantel. They care about recovered assets and prosecution stats. I watched my father crumble. The arrogant patriarch who had sneered at me in the backyard just hours ago was gone. In his place was a terrified old man, realizing he had dug his own grave. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Simone, you know the law. You can fix this. Tell her she is exaggerating. Tell her we can just pay it back. I shook my head slowly. I cannot fix a federal indictment, Dad. You sold a national treasure to a ghost. Unless that cello comes back before the fund finds out it is gone, you are not just looking at bankruptcy. You are looking at dying in a cell. The rooms spun around them. The reality of the $4.5 million price tag had finally set in, turning their greed into a noose around their necks. The silence that followed Hattie's threat of federal prison was absolute. My parents sat frozen on the designer sofa, looking like wax figures melting under heat. The reality of 20 years behind bars had finally penetrated their layer of delusion. They were not looking at a family dispute anymore. They were looking at the end of their lives. But Grandma Hattie was not done. She reached into her purse one last time. She did not pull out another legal document. She pulled out her smartphone. It was a rugged model, the kind used by field agents and security contractors. She unlocked the screen with a swipe of her gloved thumb and tapped an icon that looked like a radar sweep. You made one mistake, Desmond, she said, her voice dangerously calm. Well, you made many mistakes, but this was the fatal one. You assumed that because the cello is old, it is low tech. You assumed that the National Musical Heritage Preservation Fund would hand over a $4 million asset to a child without installing security measures. She turned the screen around so we could all see it. On the display was a high-resolution digital map of Georgia. In the center of the screen, a bright red dot was pulsing. It was moving steadily eastward along the highway line. Hattie pointed to the dot. When the fund restored the Guarnerie in 1998, they installed a passive RFID microtransponder inside the N-pin block. It is smaller than a grain of rice and completely undetectable unless you X-ray the instrument. It does not run on batteries. It is powered by the kinetic energy of the instrument moving. As long as that cello is moving, it is broadcasting. I leaned in closer to the screen. The forensic accountant in me recognized the interface immediately. It was law enforcement-grade tracking software. The dot was currently passing the exit for Macon, traveling at 70 miles per hour. Desmond looked at the screen, his eyes widening with a flicker of desperate hope. You know where it is. That means we can get it back. If we get it back, the fund will not press charges, right? We can fix this, Mother. Hattie pulled the phone back and glared at him. Do not mistake my preparation for your salvation. I am not tracking it to save your skin. I am tracking it to save history. Look where it is going, Desmond. She tapped the destination line on the map. The red dot was headed straight for the coast. Specifically, it was heading toward the port of Savannah, one of the busiest shipping terminals in the country. He is not keeping it in Atlanta, I said, realizing the horror of the situation. Vargo is exporting it. He is going to put it in a shipping container and send it overseas. Once it leaves U.S. soil and ends up in a private collection in Russia or China, we will never see it again. Hattie checked the time on the top of the screen. The dot was moving fast. We have approximately 2 hours before he reaches the port. If that cello gets loaded onto a cargo ship, it enters international maritime law jurisdiction and retrieval becomes almost impossible. She stood up, buttoning her trench coat. The air of the courtroom judge vanished, replaced by the energy of a field commander. Simone, get your car. We are not going to the police station. We are going to the highway. I have already forwarded this tracking data to my contact at the FBI Art Crime Team, but they are in D.C. They will not get here in time to stop the container. We have to intercept it ourselves. Desmond stood up, shaking. I will come too. I can help. Hattie stopped him with a single look. You will stay right here. You will sit on that sofa and pray that I get there in time. Because if that red dot disappears from this screen, so does your freedom. She marched toward the door, her heels clicking like gunshots on the floor. I grabbed my keys and followed her, leaving my parents sitting in the ruin of their own greed, staring at the empty space where a $4 million lifeline used to be. The chase was on. The heavy oak door did not stay closed for long. Less than 10 minutes after Grandma Hattie and I peeled out of the driveway, a convoy of black SUVs swarmed the estate. These were not the local patrol cars that Desmond could wave away with a smile and a donation to the policeman's ball. These were federal vehicles with tinted windows and government plates. They blocked the driveway, effectively trapping the Jaguars and Range Rovers of the remaining party guests. The neighbors who had been watching the pool excavation with envy were now peeking through their blinds, witnessing a raid. Special Agent Vance of the FBI Art Crime Team did not knock. He walked through the front door with 4 other agents behind him. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a tactical windbreaker with the 3 bold letters that strike fear into the hearts of white-collar criminals. He walked past the stunned catering staff and straight into the living room where my parents were still sitting in the wreckage of their arrogance. Desmond tried to stand up. He adjusted his linen jacket and attempted to summon the ghost of his former authority. Now see here, officer. See here. This is a private residence. If my mother sent you here to scare me, you can tell her it worked, but there is no need for this theatrical display. Agent Vance did not stop walking until he was inches from my father's face. He did not blink. He did not smile. He held up a warrant that was signed by a federal judge, Desmond Jenkins and Patricia Jenkins. You are being detained for questioning regarding the theft and illicit trafficking of a protected cultural artifact. We are securing this location as a crime scene. Patty let out a shriek that sounded more like a wounded animal than a socialite. She clutched her pearls. Crime scene. This is my home. You cannot come in here with your muddy boots and treat us like common criminals. We are pillars of this community. Vance looked around the room, his eyes landing on the expensive furniture and the view of the muddy pit outside. Ma'am, you sold a $4 million instrument to a known fence to pay for a hole in the ground. You are not pillars. You are suspects. And right now you are looking at conspiracy charges unless you start talking. The agents separated them immediately. It is the oldest tactic in the book: divide and conquer. They took Desmond to the kitchen and kept Patty in the living room. Chantel tried to sneak toward the patio door, clutching her purse, but a female agent blocked her path. Sit down, Ms. Jenkins. We need to have a conversation about that $10,000 club membership fee. We believe it constitutes receiving stolen property. Chantel collapsed onto the ottoman, sobbing that she was just a mother trying to survive. In the kitchen, Desmond was crumbling. Without Patty there to bolster his confidence, he was just a frightened man in a linen suit. Agent Vance leaned against the marble island where the catering staff had left a tray of half-eaten appetizers. He looked at my father with utter contempt. We know Vargo has the piece, Vance said calmly. We know he wired you 99 grand. We have the bank records. We have the text messages. Do not insult my intelligence by lying, Desmond. Did you know he was taking it out of the country? Desmond wiped sweat from his forehead. No. I swear. He said he was a collector. He said he wanted it for his private study. I did not know he was a smuggler. You have to believe me. I was just trying to manage the family finances. In the living room, Patty was singing a different tune. She was hysterical, claiming she had no idea the cello was valuable. She blamed Desmond. She told the agents that he handled all the money, that he made her sign papers she did not understand. She threw her husband under the bus faster than she had thrown out Maya's rosin. The perfect united front of the Jenkins family had dissolved instantly, exposing the rot underneath. They were not protecting each other anymore. They were fighting for survival. Agent Vance slid his secure phone across the kitchen island. It skidded over the cold marble and stopped right in front of my father's trembling hands. Make the call, Desmond. Put it on speaker. If you want any leniency from the United States Attorney, you better pray he picks up and agrees to turn around. Desmond stared at the device as if it were a bomb. He wiped his sweaty palms on his expensive linen trousers and dialed the number he had saved under Vargo Personal. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. It was smooth and unbothered, the voice of a man who had negotiated with cartels and warlords. I was wondering when you would call, Desmond, Vargo said before my father could speak. I assume the federal agents are with you. Tell them I say hello. Desmond looked at Agent Vance in panic, but Vance gestured for him to keep talking. Listen, Vargo, there has been a mistake. My mother, she is the trustee. We need the item back. I will buy it back from you. I will pay you double what you gave me. Just turn the truck around. Vargo laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed through the high-tech kitchen. Double. You do not have double, Desmond. You barely had the 99, and frankly, I am not interested in your money anymore. I am interested in my safety. There was a pause, and then the sound of wind rushing in the background as if a window had been rolled down. Did you think I was an amateur? Did you think I would transport high-value cargo without sweeping it first? My scanner picked up the passive RFID signal 10 miles back. You sold me a bugged instrument, Desmond. You brought heat to my operation. In my line of work, that is a capital offense. Desmond stammered. I did not know. I swear I did not know about the chip. It does not matter what you knew, Vargo cut him off, his voice turning icy. What matters is that I am currently driving over the Sydney Lanier Bridge. The water below is very deep and the current is strong. If I throw the case over the rail, the signal dies. The evidence vanishes. The salt water will destroy the wood in minutes. The FBI will never find it, and you will be left explaining to a judge why you destroyed a national treasure. Desmond gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. No, you cannot do that. That cello is worth $4 million. To you, maybe, Vargo said. To me, right now, it is a liability. But I am a businessman, so I will give you one chance to save it. The price is $500,000. Bitcoin. Transfer it to the wallet address I just sent to your personal email. You have 5 minutes. 500,000. Desmond shrieked. I do not have that kind of money. You know I do not. Then you better ask your wife to check between the sofa cushions, or maybe ask that daughter you treated so poorly. The clock is ticking, Desmond. Every minute you waste is a minute closer to that bridge railing. Make the transfer or the Guarneri learns to swim. The line went dead, leaving only the sound of my father's ragged breathing filling the room. Agent Vance snatched the phone back, his face grim. He keyed his radio. Suspect is on the Sydney Lanier Bridge threatening to dump the asset. Mobilize maritime units immediately. We have a hostage situation. The dial tone from the speakerphone seemed to echo endlessly in the high-ceilinged kitchen. Agent Vance looked at his watch and then at my father. You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Desmond. If that money is not in his account, Vargo dumps the crate. Do you have the assets liquid? Desmond did not answer. He was hyperventilating, clutching the edge of the island as if the floor were tilting beneath him. He was broke. I knew it. Hattie knew it. And now the FBI knew it. But my mother was not ready to accept defeat. The desperation in her eyes hardened into something sharp and ugly. She turned her gaze toward me. It was the look she used to give me when I was a teenager, and she wanted me to cover for Chantel's mistakes. It was a look of expectation mixed with command. She lunged across the kitchen and grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging into the fabric of my blazer. Simone, pay him, she screamed, shaking me. You have money. You are a partner at your firm. You have that investment portfolio you are always bragging about. Transfer the Bitcoin. Do it now. I stood like a statue, letting her shake me. I looked over her shoulder at Agent Vance, who was watching this domestic train wreck with a raised eyebrow. The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She had stolen from me, slandered me to the police, and now she wanted me to empty my savings to save her from the consequences of her own crime. Patty, I said, my voice flat. You want me to send $500,000 of my hard-earned money to a black market criminal? Yes, she hissed, her face inches from mine. It is just money, Simone. You can make more. Your father will go to prison if you do not do this. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the daughter who let her father rot in jail over a stupid instrument? Be the bigger person for once in your life. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not open my banking app. I opened the voice memo recorder. I pressed the big red button and held the screen up so she could see the timer counting up. I am recording this conversation, Mom. I want you to repeat what you just said for the federal agent standing right there. You are asking me to finance a transaction with a known terrorist and money launderer. You are attempting to extort me to cover up a felony. Patty recoiled as if I had burned her. She looked at the phone and then at Agent Vance. Put that away. Stop trying to trap us. We are your family. I am not trapping you, I said, stepping out of her grasp. I am protecting myself, because I know how this works. If I pay him, you will never pay me back. You will say it was a gift. You will say it was my duty. And then, when the FBI traces the Bitcoin to my account, I will be the one charged with aiding and abetting. I looked at my father, who was still gasping for air. I am not paying Vargo a single cent. I hope he dumps it. I hope he throws it right into the Atlantic Ocean. Because at least then it will be gone forever, instead of being used as a bargaining chip by this toxic family. You are a monster, Patty shrieked, tears ruining her mascara. You are heartless. No, Mom, I said, checking the time on the screen. I am just a forensic accountant. And I know a bad investment when I see one. You two are on your own. Agent Vance stepped forward, his hand on his radio. Time is up. We are moving. He tapped his earpiece, speaking to the maritime units. Suspect is non-compliant. Intercept on the bridge immediately. All units engage. The kitchen exploded into activity as the agents rushed out, leaving my parents standing in the silence of their impending doom. The silence left by the FBI agents was short-lived. It was broken not by a sob from my mother, but by the heavy sliding of the patio door being thrown open. A large man in a neon safety vest and steel toe boots stomped into the kitchen. I recognized him as the foreman of the pool company. He looked annoyed, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag, oblivious to the fact that he had just walked into a federal crime scene. Hey, Mr. Jenkins, the foreman boomed, his voice echoing off the marble counters. We hit the depth target for the deep end, per the contract that triggers the second installment payment of $30,000 for materials. I need you to run the card or cut the check now so I can order the concrete for tomorrow morning. Desmond looked up from the island, where he was still slumped over. He looked pale and sweaty. He fumbled for his wallet, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Right, of course, the second installment. I will just transfer it now. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. I watched from the corner of the room, crossing my arms. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The FBI art crime team does not mess around. When they suspect a felony involving major assets, they do not just knock on the door. They lock down the finances. Desmond tapped the screen. Then he tapped it again, harder. A look of confusion crossed his face, followed by sheer panic. He looked at the foreman with wide, terrified eyes. It says, account frozen. It says contact branch immediately. The foreman crossed his arms, his friendly demeanor vanishing instantly. He looked at the luxury appliances and then at my father. Look, buddy, I do not care about your branch issues. I have a crew out there and suppliers waiting. Run a different card. Desmond tried a credit card. Declined. He tried a business card. Declined. Every single asset associated with his social security number had been put on ice. The reality of his situation was crashing down. He was not just broke. He was legally insolvent. The foreman stepped closer, invading my father's personal space. You are telling me you do not have the money. You had me tear up this yard, bring in heavy machinery, and now you are stiffing me. It is a misunderstanding. Desmond stammered, backing away. "The bank is making a mistake. Just give me until tomorrow." "I do not work on credit," the foreman spat. "And I do not work for liars." He turned around and marched toward the patio door, pulling a walkie-talkie from his belt. "Hey, Tony, shut it down. But before you load up the rig, do me a favor, level the grade, and I mean really level it." We watched in horror through the glass walls. The operator in the excavator revved the engine, but he did not smooth the dirt. He swung the massive metal bucket sideways, smashing it into the expensive stone retaining wall my father had built last year. The stone shattered. The machine spun around its tracks, churning the pristine lawn into a thick brown sludge. The operator dropped the bucket onto the intricate irrigation system, ripping white PVC pipes out of the ground like severed veins. Water sprayed everywhere, turning the mud into a swamp. He smashed the rose bushes, he crushed the antique garden bench, and he dragged the bucket through the center of the patio, cracking the expensive slate tiles. It was not construction, it was demolition. In less than 5 minutes, the backyard of the Jenkins estate went from a construction site to a battlefield. It was a muddy, ruined wasteland. The foreman looked back at my father one last time and spat on the floor. "See you in small claims court." He walked out, leaving the door open. The humidity and the smell of wet dirt flooded the air-conditioned kitchen. My parents stood there watching the excavator roll away, leaving behind a physical representation of what they had done to their own lives. They had destroyed everything beautiful they owned, and now they were left with nothing but mud. The dust from the backyard demolition had barely settled when I turned my attention to the final loose end standing in the hallway. Brad was trying to make himself invisible. He was inching toward the foyer, hoping that in the chaos of the FBI raid and the pool company's tantrum, he could slip away unnoticed. He looked like a rat, sensing the water rising on a sinking ship. "Going somewhere, Brad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet sobbing of my mother. Brad froze. He turned around, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I have to go check on a listing, Simone. Real estate does not sleep even if your family is imploding. I will be back later to help straighten this out." I walked over to him, holding my phone up. The screen displayed a sent email confirmation. The recipient address ended in .gov. "You are not going to a listing," I said. "And you are definitely not coming back. You see, while Dad was negotiating with terrorists and Mom was screaming at me, I was doing a little math. That $20,000 you wired to the offshore casino, that was income, Brad. Unreported illicit income derived from the sale of stolen property." Brad's face went chalk white. "What are you talking about?" "That was a loan." "It was not a loan," I corrected him, stepping closer. "And since you did not declare it and you definitely did not pay taxes on it, you have triggered a little alarm at the Internal Revenue Service. I just forwarded my forensic analysis to their Criminal Investigation Division. You know the one thing they hate more than gambling rings: tax evasion." Chantel looked up from the ottoman, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Brad, what is she talking about? What $20,000? Before he could lie, a heavy knock rattled the front door. It was not the FBI this time. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They moved with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of accountants who carry badges. One of them held up a picture of Brad. "Bradley Miller," he stated flatly. "We are with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding tax fraud and structuring financial transactions to evade reporting requirements." Brad bolted. He tried to run for the side door, but the FBI agent standing guard simply stepped in his path. Brad bounced off the agent's chest and stumbled back right into the hands of the taxmen. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final. Chantel screamed a raw sound of betrayal that echoed off the high ceilings. She scrambled to her feet, rushing at him. "You stole from the pool money. You gambled away my son's therapy money." Brad was crying now, loud, ugly sobs. "It was a sure thing, babe. I was going to double it. I was going to buy you a car." I watched as they dragged him out the front door. He passed me, kicking and screaming, pleading for a lawyer. I did not feel pity. I felt the satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing. I looked at Chantel, who was collapsing onto the floor, and then at my parents, who were staring at the empty doorway. They had wanted to talk about assets all week. Well, I had just liquidated their biggest liability. The house was now full of federal agents, the yard was a ruin, and the family was in handcuffs. The audit was almost complete. Chantel was huddled in the corner of the ruined living room, seeking the only comfort she understood, which was the blue light of her smartphone screen. Even with her husband in handcuffs and the backyard destroyed, she could not resist the urge to control the narrative. She had wiped her eyes carefully, ensuring just enough mascara ran down her cheeks to look tragic, but still photogenic. She hit the Go Live button on her social media platform of choice. I watched her from the kitchen island. She was speaking in that breathless, whispery voice she reserved for her followers. You guys, I am literally shaking right now. My own sister called the FBI on us. She is just so jealous of our happiness. She is trying to ruin our family because she is miserable and alone. We were just trying to build a therapy pool for little Marcus, and she turned it into a crime scene. Please send prayers. We are being targeted. The hearts and crying emojis began to float up the side of her screen. Her followers were eating it up. They were calling me a monster. They were offering to start a GoFundMe for her legal fees. Chantel looked up at me and smirked. It was a small, fleeting expression of triumph. She thought she could win the court of public opinion even if she lost in the court of law. She forgot that I am not just an accountant. I am an auditor, and auditors bring receipts. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure messaging app. I had a contact at the Atlanta Scoop, a ruthless local gossip blog that thrived on exposing the dirty laundry of Buckhead's elite. I did not need to write a story. I just attached 3 files. Exhibit A was the bank transfer of $10,000 to the Buckhead Social League. Exhibit B was the invoice for a $5,000 designer handbag purchased yesterday. Exhibit C was the medical report stating Marcus had not seen a therapist in 6 months due to non-payment. I hit send. Then I engaged a script I had written to auto-reply to her live stream comments with a link to the leaked documents. I watched Chantel's screen from across the room. The change was instantaneous. The stream of hearts stopped. For a second, the chat froze. Then the angry emojis started. They came in a wave, a tsunami of red faces and vomit symbols. Chantel frowned, tapping her screen. Guys, my connection is weird. What are you saying? Then she read the comments. One user wrote, "You spent the therapy money on a social club membership." Another wrote, "I just saw the invoices. You are a scammer." A third wrote, "Justice for Marcus. You are a bad mother." The tide turned so fast it was dizzying. The internet does not forgive child neglect, especially when it is wrapped in luxury. The comments moved faster than she could delete them. People were tagging the brands she worked with, demanding they drop her. They were tagging the Buckhead Social League, demanding her removal. Her digital empire built on lies and filters was collapsing in real time. Chantel began to panic. "No, that is fake. Simone made that up. It is photoshopped. Stop it. Stop saying that." But they did not stop. The viewer count skyrocketed as the drama went viral. Strangers were joining just to insult her. The hashtag #ScammerMom began to trend locally. Chantel screamed and tried to end the live stream, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the phone. It landed face up, continuing to broadcast the ceiling and the sound of her hyperventilating. I walked over and picked up the phone. I looked into the camera, my face calm and impassive. "The show is canceled," I said. I ended the stream and deleted her account. Chantel looked at me with horror. "You ruined my life," she whispered. "You took my followers." I looked at her, at the woman who had prioritized likes over her own son's health. "I did not take anything, Chantel. I just balanced the books. You are insolvent, both financially and morally, and now the whole world knows it." The phone in Agent Vance's hand buzzed with a sharp vibration that cut through the dead air of the living room. He held up a hand, silencing my mother's sobbing. He listened for 10 seconds, his face betraying nothing. Then he nodded once and said affirmative, secure the asset and transport to the federal vault. He lowered the phone and looked at Grandma Hattie. We got him, Vance said. The Port Authority police intercepted Vargo's truck at the terminal gate. He tried to run. He did not get far. He is in custody and the crate has been recovered. The bomb squad scanned it and the curators have visually confirmed the guarnery is intact. Not a scratch. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The tension in my chest uncoiled, leaving me feeling lightheaded. The heritage was safe. Maya's future was safe. But for my parents, the nightmare was just entering its second act. Vance reached into his tactical vest and pulled out 2 folded documents. He did not hand them over gently. He dropped them onto the coffee table right next to the empty champagne glasses from their premature celebration. Desmond Jenkins and Patricia Jenkins, you are officially under arrest. These are your indictments. You are being charged with conspiracy to traffic stolen cultural property, interstate transport of stolen goods, and wire fraud. Due to the high value of the asset and your attempt to destroy evidence via the bridge threat, the U.S. Attorney is seeking the maximum penalty. Desmond stared at the papers. His hands were shaking so violently, he could not pick them up. How long, he whispered. How long are we talking about? Vance looked at him without a shred of sympathy. Federal sentencing guidelines for a theft of this magnitude, combined with the enhancement for the cultural significance of the object, put you in the range of 15 to 20 years. And remember, Desmond, there is no parole in the federal system. You serve 85% of your time. You will be 85 years old when you walk out. Patty let out a sound that was half scream, half gasp. 15 years. I cannot go to prison for 15 years. I have a life. I have committees. You cannot do this to us. We are the victims here. That man Vargo tricked us. Vance shook his head. Vargo is already cutting a deal, Patty. He is singing like a bird. He gave us the texts where Desmond told him to keep the transaction off the books. He gave us the audio recording where you authorized the sale for quick cash. You are not victims. You are co-conspirators. 2 agents stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from their belts. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut was the loudest thing in the world. I watched as they cuffed my father. He looked small and frail, stripped of his bluster. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate pleading. Simone, do something. Call your lawyers. You know people. Do not let them take us. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stolen from his granddaughter to gamble and build a pool. I looked at the woman who tried to extort me to save her own skin. I cannot help you, Dad, I said, my voice steady. I am a witness for the prosecution. The agents hauled them up. They marched them out the front door, past the ruined, muddy yard, past the neighbors watching from the street, and into the back of the waiting SUVs. I stood in the doorway and watched the flashing blue lights fade into the distance. The house was silent. The party was over. The check had come due and they had paid with their lives. The interrogation room at the federal building was a sterile box of gray walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. Desmond and Patty sat on opposite sides of a metal table, still wearing their clothes from the party. The linen suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat, and the silk robe looked ridiculous in this harsh environment. They looked like ghosts, stripped of the arrogance that had defined them just hours ago. The heavy steel door buzzed and opened. A man in a charcoal suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. He did not look like a public defender. He looked like the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour to destroy lives. Behind him walked Grandma Hattie. She looked fresh and composed, her Burberry coat spotless. She did not sit. She stood by the door like a sentinel. The lawyer placed his briefcase on the table and snapped the latches open. My name is Arthur Sterling. I represent the National Musical Heritage Preservation Fund. I am here authorized by the Board of Trustees and your mother to offer you a lifeline. Desmond looked up, hope flickering in his bloodshot eyes. A lifeline? You mean you can get the charges dropped? Sterling sat down and folded his hands. The fund is willing to withdraw their criminal complaint regarding the theft and trafficking. Without the victim's cooperation, the U.S. attorney is likely to reduce the charges to a misdemeanor with probation. You would avoid federal prison. Patty let out a sob of relief, clutching her chest. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Mother. I knew you would not let us rot in there. Sterling held up a hand. Do not thank anyone yet, Mrs. Jenkins. This is not charity, it is a transaction. The fund demands full restitution for the operational costs of the recovery, the damage to the instrument's provenance, and the significant reputational harm caused to the organization. We calculate the total damages at $3.2 million. Desmond's jaw dropped. $3 million? We do not have that. You know we do not. The accounts are frozen. The house is leveraged. Sterling slid a thick document across the table. We know exactly what you have, Desmond. We have run a full asset trace. The equity in your home, the vacation condo in Destin, the 2 luxury vehicles, the jewelry, the remaining stocks. It comes to roughly $3.3 million if liquidated immediately. He tapped the document with a manicured finger. The deal is simple. You sign over everything. You agree to a complete liquidation of the Jenkins estate. The proceeds go to the fund. In exchange, we drop the felony complaint. You walk out of here today, but you walk out with nothing. No house, no cars, no club memberships. You will be penniless. Patty stared at the lawyer in horror. You want us to be homeless. You want to take the mansion. It is not your mansion anymore, Sterling said coldly. It is the settlement. You have 2 choices. You can keep your assets and spend the next 15 years in a federal penitentiary while the government seizes them anyway to pay your fines. Or you can sign this paper, give up the lifestyle you clearly cannot afford, and keep your freedom. Hattie stepped forward from the door. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. Choose wisely, Desmond. You wanted to talk about family assets. Well, now you have to decide what is worth more to you, the appearance of wealth or your actual life. Desmond looked at the document. He looked at the terrifying reality of prison. He realized that the game was finally over. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking uncontrollably. Sign it, Patty, he whispered. But sign it, he screamed, slamming his hand on the table. It is over. We lost. Desmond signed his name. He passed the pen to Patty. She wept as she signed away her social standing, her home, and her pride. Sterling took the papers and placed them back in his briefcase. Done, he said, standing up. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The foreclosure team will arrive tomorrow at noon. I suggest you start packing. The drive back from the federal building was silent. There were no luxury SUVs this time, just a taxi that smelled of stale cigarette smoke. When Desmond and Patty stepped out onto the driveway of the Buckhead estate, they did not look like the owners. They looked like trespassers. The yellow caution tape from the FBI raid was still fluttering in the wind, and the backyard was a churned-up wasteland of mud and broken pipe. They walked into the kitchen where the smell of the unfinished party still lingered. Arthur Sterling, the lawyer for the Heritage Fund, was already there waiting for them. He did not sit. He stood by the granite island with a final itemized invoice in his hand. We have finalized the plea agreement details. Sterling said, his voice devoid of warmth. While the asset seizure covers the bulk of the liability, there is the matter of the immediate restitution costs. This includes the maritime recovery operation fees, the emergency conservation assessment for the instrument, and of course the legal fees for the fund's intervention. He placed the paper on the counter. The bottom line was circled in red ink, $400,000. Desmond stared at the number. He laughed a weak, hysterical sound. 400,000. We do not have 400,000. You took the accounts. You took the stocks. We have nothing left. That is correct, Sterling replied. You have no liquid cash, but you do have equity, or rather what is left of it. This house is the only asset remaining that can cover this debt. If this 400,000 is not paid within 48 hours, the plea deal is void and the federal charges will be reinstated. You will go to prison. Patty gripped the edge of the counter. You cannot make us sell the house. This has been the Jenkins family seat for 30 years. We are Buckhead royalty. Where will we go? What will the neighbors say? Sterling looked at her with pitying eyes. The neighbors already know Mrs. Jenkins. The raid was on the news. As for where you will go, that is not my concern. My concern is the wire transfer. You need to list this property immediately. And given the state of the backyard and the urgency, you will not be getting market value. You are going to have to sell it at a fire sale price. Desmond walked over to the sliding glass door. He looked out at the destroyed yard. The pool company had left it a ruin. The stone patio was cracked. The rose bushes were dead. It looked exactly like his life. He realized then that there was no way out. The house was not an asset anymore. It was a tomb. Call the realtor, Desmond said softly without turning around. Patty gasped. No, Desmond. We can fight this. We can borrow from friends. We have no friends, Patty, he snapped, spinning around. His face was gray and aged. Brad is in jail. Chantel is ruined. And everyone we know watched the FBI drag us out of here. Nobody is going to lend us a dime. The house is gone. We have to sell it today, or we go to jail. Patty collapsed into one of the bar stools, sobbing into her hands. The reality had finally pierced her armor of delusion. The grandeur was over. The hosting duties were over. Desmond pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking as he dialed the number of a discount real estate broker, one of those "we buy ugly houses" services he used to mock. When the agent answered, Desmond did not use his impressive voice. He spoke quietly, like a defeated man. Yes, I have a property in Buckhead. I need a cash offer. Today. Yes, I understand it will be below market. Just get it done. He hung up and looked at his wife. Start packing, Patty. Take only what fits in the sedan. We leave in the morning. The silence that followed was heavy. They sat in the kitchen of the mansion they had sacrificed their family to keep, listening to the clock tick down the final seconds of their high society life. The $400,000 debt hung over them like a guillotine blade, and the only way to stop it from falling was to walk away from everything they had ever loved. The vultures began circling at dawn. By the time the sun was high over the Buckhead tree line, the driveway was full of pickup trucks and sedans belonging to bottom-feeding investors. These were not the families my mother had envisioned living in her estate. These were property flippers and wholesale liquidators, men who smelled desperation the way a shark smells blood in the water. They did not wipe their feet when they entered the foyer. They walked through the house with heavy boots, criticizing the crown molding and tapping on the walls to check for dry rot. They treated the home not as a mansion, but as a carcass to be stripped. Desmond followed them around, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. He pointed out the imported Italian tile and the custom cabinetry. One investor, a man with a thick neck and a clipboard, just laughed. He walked straight to the sliding glass doors and pointed at the disaster zone outside. You have a $50,000 drainage problem out there, Mr. Jenkins. The foundation is compromised from the heavy machinery vibration. The retaining wall is gone. Honestly, the house is a teardown. The land is the only thing worth money here, and even that is a hard sell with the neighborhood association suing you for property damage. Desmond wiped sweat from his upper lip. But the location. This is the most exclusive street in Atlanta. The investor sneered. It is a stigmatized property. The whole city saw the FBI raid on the news. Nobody wants to buy a house where the feds drag the owners out in cuffs. It is bad juju. The offers started coming in and they were brutal. 50 cents on the dollar, 40 cents. They were lowballing him, knowing he had a 48-hour deadline to pay the restitution or go to prison. Desmond rejected the first three out of pride, but as the afternoon wore on, the panic set in. The $400,000 debt was a ticking time bomb. At 4 o'clock, the broker my father had hired walked into the kitchen. He looked exhausted. Look, Desmond, I have an offer. It is weird, but it is solid. Desmond looked up from his hands. How much? The broker slid a contract across the island. It is an all-cash offer. No inspection contingency, no appraisal. They can wire the funds into the escrow account by tomorrow morning. The buyer is a holding company called Phoenix Rising LLC. They are offering exactly the amount needed to pay off your mortgage and cover the restitution to the Heritage Fund. Not a penny more. Desmond stared at the number. It was millions less than the appraisal value from last month. It left him with zero equity. He would walk away with his freedom, but he would be destitute. "This is robbery," Desmond whispered. "Who is Phoenix Rising?" "I do not know," the broker admitted. "It is a blind trust represented by a corporate attorney, but they are the only ones willing to overlook the mud pit and the legal baggage. Take it or leave it, Desmond. But if you leave it, you go to jail." Desmond looked around the kitchen one last time. He looked at the place where he had ruled as a tyrant for decades. He realized he had no leverage. He was not a negotiator anymore. He was a beggar. "Give me the pen," he said, his voice breaking. He signed the deed transfer with a shaky hand. With that signature, he sold his birthright for a get-out-of-jail-free card. The house was gone. The legacy was gone. And somewhere in the city, a mysterious LLC had just acquired a multi-million-dollar property for the price of a legal settlement. My father thought he was lucky to escape. He had no idea he had just signed his home over to the person he underestimated the most. The conference room at the title company was sterile and cold-smelling of stale coffee and laser printer toner. Desmond and Patty sat on one side of the long mahogany table. They looked like refugees from their own lives. Desmond was wearing a tracksuit because his suits were already packed in boxes. Patty wore no makeup, her face pale and puffy from days of crying. They had just finished signing the mountain of paperwork that transferred the deed of the Buckhead estate to the mysterious Phoenix Rising LLC. The closing attorney stacked the papers and tapped them on the table. "Everything appears to be in order. The wire transfer from the buyer has cleared the escrow account. The $400,000 for the restitution has been sent directly to the Heritage Fund. You are officially debt-free, Mr. Jenkins, but you are also homeless. The buyer is on their way now to collect the keys." Desmond slumped in his chair. "I do not want to meet them. I do not want to look the person in the eye who bought my life's work for scrap value. Just leave the keys on the table and let us go." The attorney shook his head. "The buyer insisted on a personal handover. They want to ensure the property is vacated immediately." Before Desmond could protest, the heavy door to the conference room swung open. The sound of confident high heels clicking on the laminate floor filled the silence. I did not look up from my tablet immediately. I walked to the head of the table and placed my briefcase down with a deliberate thud. "Hello, Dad." "Hello, Mom." Desmond spun his chair around so fast he nearly tipped over. Patty gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They stared at me as if I were a ghost. Simone, Desmond stammered. "What are you doing here? This is a private closing. You made your point. You ruined us. Now get out so we can salvage what is left of our dignity." I did not leave. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the buyer's chair, and sat down. I smoothed out my skirt and looked at the attorney. "Is the deed recorded?" "Yes, Ms. Jenkins," the attorney said, sliding the file toward me. "The title is now legally registered to Phoenix Rising LLC. You are the sole owner." Patty's eyes widened until they looked like saucers. You are Phoenix Rising. You bought the house." I nodded slowly. "It was a simple calculation, really. You were desperate. You needed to sell in 48 hours to avoid prison. That depressed the price significantly. I used my savings, my performance bonuses from the firm, and the settlement fees I earned from exposing Vargo's network to the FBI. I bought the house for 30 cents on the dollar. It was the investment of a lifetime." A look of twisted relief washed over Desmond's face. He let out a shaky laugh and wiped his forehead. "Oh, thank God. You played a hard game, Simone, but you came through in the end. You bought it to keep it in the family. You saved us. I knew you would not let your parents be homeless. When can we move back in?" I looked at him with the same cold detachment he had shown me when he sold the cello. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "You are confused, Dad. I did not buy the house to save you. I bought the house because it is my childhood home, and I refuse to let your greed destroy it. But as for the occupancy arrangement, let me be clear." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single silver key. I placed it on the table under my hand. "This is my house now, my rules. And my first rule is that I do not house criminals. You have until sunset to remove your personal effects. The locks will be changed at 6 p.m. If you are still on the property after that, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Patty screamed. "You cannot kick us out. We are your parents." I stood up, picking up the deed. "You ceased to be my parents the day you stole from my daughter. You are now just tenants who failed to pay their rent. Get out of my conference room, and get out of my house." The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the wreckage of the backyard. It was 6 o'clock exactly. I stood on the front porch with my arms crossed, watching the final act of the Jenkins family tragedy play out. A rusted U-Haul truck idled in the driveway, its engine sputtering and coughing, a stark contrast to the luxury sedans that used to park there. Desmond came out the front door dragging a heavy cardboard box that was bursting at the seams. He looked 20 years older than he had last week. His linen suit was gone, replaced by a stained polo shirt and jeans that hung loosely on his frame. Patty followed him, clutching a porcelain vase like a lifeline. She was not crying anymore. She was in a state of catatonic shock, moving like a robot, programmed only to carry objects to the truck. Chantel was there too. Since Brad's arrest and the seizure of their assets, she had nowhere else to go. She dragged a suitcase down the steps, her high heels clicking on the stone for the last time. She stopped in front of me and glared. "You cannot do this, Simone," she spat. "We are family. You are throwing your own sister onto the street. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at her calmly. "I heard the Motel 6 off the interstate has weekly rates. Or maybe you can stay with one of those followers you love so much. But you are not staying here. This house is now a sanctuary, and I will not have it polluted by the people who tried to destroy it." Desmond stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked back at the house and then at the side gate leading to the backyard. He gestured toward the muddy crater. "At least finish the project, Simone," he said, his voice hollow. "We already paid for the excavation. The plumbing is there. Just pour the concrete. It will increase the property value. Do not let all that money go to waste." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. "You still do not get it, Dad. I am not building a pool. I am calling the contractors tomorrow morning to fill that hole back in." Patty gasped. "You are filling it in." "But why?" "Because I am building something that actually matters," I said, my voice ringing out in the evening air. "I am going to construct a soundproof recital hall right there in the garden. It will be a dedicated practice space for Maya. Every time she plays a note in that room, it will be a reminder that her talent won. The ground you dug up to sell her out will become the foundation of her success." Desmond stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. "You are turning a wellness center into a music room. I am turning a crime scene into a legacy I corrected. Now give me the keys." Desmond reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy brass keyring. He hesitated for a second, his fingers lingering on the metal, then he dropped them into my outstretched hand. They landed with a heavy clinking sound. "Goodbye, Dad. Drive safe." I watched them climb into the cab of the moving truck. They sat three across, squeezed into the tight space. Desmond started the engine and the truck groaned as it rolled down the driveway. They did not look back. They drove out of the gates of the Buckhead estate and turned onto the main road, disappearing into the flow of traffic. 2 hours later, Desmond pulled the truck into the parking lot of the Shady Pines apartments on the outskirts of the city. The pavement was cracked and weeds grew through the asphalt. A police siren wailed in the distance closer than they were used to. They carried their boxes up 3 flights of stairs to Unit 3B. The apartment smelled of mildew and boiled cabbage. The carpet was a stained brown shag from the 70s, and the windows looked out onto a brick wall. Patty set the porcelain vase down on the laminate counter and looked around the cramped living room. There was no space for her grand furniture. There was no view. There was just the humming of a broken refrigerator and the crushing weight of their new reality. They had traded a palace for a prison of their own making. The lights of the Atlanta Symphony Hall dimmed, plunging the velvet-seated audience into a respectful darkness. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence so heavy with anticipation that it felt physical. I sat in the front row center seat. To my right sat Grandma Hattie, upright and regal in a new Burberry trench coat, looking like the queen of a nation that had just won a war. We did not speak. We did not need to. We just watched the empty center stage where a single spotlight cut through the gloom, waiting for the moment we had fought for. Then she walked out. Maya stepped into the light. She looked taller than I remembered, dressed in a simple black gown that made her look older than 9. She carried the Guarneri del Gesù with a reverence that silenced the room. The varnish glowed under the stage lights, a deep, rich amber that seemed to hold 300 years of history. She sat down, adjusted the end pin, and nodded to the conductor. When her bow touched the strings, the sound that filled the hall was not just music, it was a force of nature. It was the Elgar Cello Concerto, deep and haunting, resonant with a sorrow and a triumph that tore at your chest. The sound of the $4.5 million instrument was indistinguishable from the sound of my daughter's soul. They were one entity now. I watched her fingers fly across the fingerboard, navigating the complex passages with a ferocity that made my heart ache with pride. The tracking chip was still inside the wood, a silent sentinel, but tonight it was not tracking a stolen asset. It was tracking a miracle. Far behind us, in the shadows of the upper mezzanine near the emergency exit doors, 2 figures stood huddled together. Desmond and Patty were not on the guest list. They had slipped past the ushers, wearing clothes that looked worn and washed too many times in a laundromat sink. Desmond's hair was gray and unkempt, and Patty's face was lined with the stress of poverty. They peered through the small vertical window of the double doors, their faces pressed against the safety glass like starving children looking into a banquet hall. They could hear the music faintly through the heavy doors. They watched the audience leaning forward, captivated by the granddaughter they had dismissed as a noisemaker. Desmond wiped a tear from his cheek. It was not a tear of joy. It was the bitter, crushing realization of what he had thrown away. He had held a masterpiece in his hands and called it firewood. He had held a family in his hands and sold it for a hole in the ground. A heavy hand landed on Desmond's shoulder. He jumped, spinning around to face a security guard who looked at their shabby clothes with suspicion. "Ticket holders only." The guard grunted, thumbing toward the stairwell. "You two cannot stand here blocking the fire exit. You need to leave." Patty opened her mouth to argue, to summon the ghost of the buckhead socialite she used to be, but the words died in her throat. She looked at the guard and then back through the glass at the stage where flowers were beginning to rain down on Maya. She realized with a sickening clarity that she did not belong in this world anymore. "We are going," Desmond whispered, his voice cracking. "We are just leaving." The guard escorted them to the stairwell, pushing them out of the climate-controlled hall and back into the humid, unforgiving night. Inside, the applause was deafening, a thunderous ovation that shook the walls. Maya stood and bowed, hugging the cello to her chest, safe in the spotlight, surrounded by the people who truly valued her. The doors swung shut, sealing out the past, leaving my parents in the dark where they belonged, while inside the music played on. The saga of the Jenkins family serves as a brutal yet necessary reminder of the distinction between price and value. Desmond and Patty were so obsessed with the appearance of wealth, the mansion, the pool, the social status, that they cannibalized the true assets of their family trust legacy and Maya's prodigious talent. They viewed the Guarneri cello not as a vessel for art or a piece of history, but merely as a quick cash injection to fuel their vanity. This short-sighted greed ultimately cost them everything, proving that when you sacrifice integrity for material gain, you lose both. Conversely, Simone and Grandma Hattie demonstrated that true stewardship requires courage. They understood that a legacy is not about what you own, but what you protect and nurture. The story illustrates that shortcuts often lead to dead ends. The easy money from the theft led to prison and poverty, while the hard work of justice and practice led to the symphony stage. In the end, the music survived because it was guarded by love, while the hollow pursuit of status collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Would you like me to compile all these segments into a complete formatted script file for you to download? Or are you ready to start brainstorming a new story idea?